Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining us here today. I see a ton of talented, experienced managers on this and board members on this call. So great to have everybody here with us here today. And what I really like about this topic here today, it's quite a unique topic that we're bringing to the discussion, and also two all-star speakers. Trey, Amy, just fantastic people, great people to learn from. Just a quick note, this program is approved by CAM ICB for 1 hour of continuing education. So if you have your CMCA, we'll make sure you get your certificates afterwards. And speaking of that, one request, please have your camera on just at the very beginning. And also, if you could just type something in the chat, just anything, just a hello, anything like that, that'd be great, just so we can verify your attendance to make sure that you get the 1 hour of continuing education credit. We'll certainly save some time for questions. We'd appreciate being able to address those questions at the very end. If you could add your questions to the chat, I'll make sure to monitor those and we'll distribute to Amy and Trey at the very end of the presentation. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to our two all-star speakers. Amy and Trey, you guys can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. Yeah, we're excited to be here and talk to you guys today about contracts. My name's Trey Waldman. I'm the VP of Operations for Waldman Engineering Consultants. I do all things sales, marketing, and operations for them. I put together about 500 proposals and contracts a year, and excited to talk to you about contracts from the engineering perspective.
Awesome. I'm Amy Peterselli. I'm an attorney at Cayman and Cusimano. Focus only on community associations. A lot of that's doing condominium associations and handling contract reviews. Many of you may recognize some of my red lines on things that you have sent our firm to review. Happy to talk about this subject. I think it's so important, and especially as we continue to see an increase in reserve studies and these bigger projects come to fruition, it's important to understand not only the importance of having an engineering consultant, but what to look for in the myriad of contracts that ensue any big undertaking of an association. So thanks so much for investing in your education, in your profession, and your communities.
Awesome. So we'll start off with just the criticality of contracts, specifically as a part of major capital repair and replacement projects. These are the biggest outlays of money that you guys are making as property managers and association boards. So we want to make sure we give you guys the information necessary to understand what details should be in these contracts, why they're so important, so we can make sure that these projects are as successful as possible and we're using our resources properly. So a couple of the major pillars that I'm going to focus on from the engineering side of things here, as far as why contracts matter on capital projects. Scope confusion. Scope is one of the most critical details as a part of a contract. When we're spending major amounts of money for repair replacement, we want to make sure the scope of work addresses the actual needs of the association. If we have a leak that we're trying to repair, we want to make sure that leak is actually going to address where that leak is originating. So making sure that we have a scope that is clearly defined, works for the association, and is laid out explicitly in contract form and in the contractor's documents when they're providing their bids. We want to make sure that we have contracts that are clear and put together by an independent third party so we can avoid bid chaos. When we have a major project coming up, if we're going to replace our roofs and we have 5 roofers come out and provide bids, they're going to have 5 different scopes of work with 5 different materials, 5 different assumptions, and that creates a lot of ambiguity and makes it extremely difficult to compare those bids when they're coming in. So we want to make sure we can have the tools necessary so we actually understand and can see the real differences between the bidders for the project. We want to do the work on the front end and again, make sure the scope is very detailed and comprehensive so we can minimize the amount of change orders over the course of the project. Notice I said minimize, not eliminate. We will never completely eliminate the need for change orders over the course of a project. There are always the risks of unforeseen circumstances, but we want to reduce the variance there and make sure that we're not selecting the lowest bidder who has very ambiguous terms and then change orders balloon that contract cost 50%, 80%, whatever it may be. And then finally, warranty and responsibility disputes. We'll dive into these in a bit more detail. Responsibility disputes are a major one that we see all the time. You have a window installer replace all the windows at the association to address leaks there. They replace all the windows. The leaks continue. Association points at the window installer, who points at the mason, who points at the roofer. We want to make sure that these details are addressed before work starts. So again, we know that we're understanding what work is going to address the root concerns of the association here. And then warranties, just making sure that we actually understand the warranty that we're getting, and we've satisfied the requirements of that warranty and have the documentation necessary to pursue a warranty claim if needed.
Okay, yeah. That's so just even reviewing this slide in general, there's a difference in how Trey and what he does to review contracts differs from me. So our legal analysis, our legal review of contracts does not include any type of, confirming that the scope is adequate. That's not what we're here to do. We look at obviously the legal implications of the language, whether or not the association is protected. And so that's not something that's within my expertise in any capacity. And I will never try. I will never try to be like, oh, these are the materials that are needed for this project. Absolutely. Like, or why are you substituting X for Z? It's not, you don't want me to. I wouldn't know if they were just building things with popsicle sticks. So it's really important to get that wherewithal of expert opinion relative to what's being used for these particular projects. And in addition to that, the uniformity of the bids kind of follows uniformity with the contracts when one's decided, and having some of those more template agreements, although depending on the dollar amount and the scope of the work, can be pretty arduous to get through. See contracts that are at least 80 pages plus for some bigger projects, the AIA ones in particular. We know how to review those. And so having that uniformity with the contracts is super helpful. The contracts that scare me the most are the shorter ones. Those are the ones that should be scary, especially if they're over probably 5 to 10K. But typically with these bigger capital projects, you see those 80 pagers. In addition to that, the things that we look for in evaluating the contract is in regard to change orders is just that the language is explicitly stated that a change order is needed for any increased cost not otherwise provided in the contract. We try to protect the association as much because let's be real, with a lot of these projects, they're being funded by special assessments, association loans, and sometimes just it gets to be penny pinching, and understandably so, given the dollar amount. And the last thing the association really needs is to look at a project and realize that they've exceeded their expected costs tenfold because of some loose language. And so I think with some of those bigger contracts, the 80 pagers, that's all accounted for. They really do a good job at protecting the association, and we just kind of help to bolster that in our review. And then also just ensuring that the warrantability, both on the workmanship and then on the materials, is adequately stated, just to protect the association again. And at least if you have those terms pointed out and pinpointed and defined, workmanship for 5 years or what have you, it's better than nothing. So that's really just as far as the contract process with this slide is my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about really the core of this. Hopefully there is general information here that can be applicable across virtually all of these major contracts that you'll deal with as far as the capital repair plans. General overview of the engineering stages or phases, control points for repair project that we want to see specified in our contractual agreements with an association or the association with the contractor. Again, we want to start with that complete diagnosis and understanding, making sure that the leak that's manifesting at the window is coming from the window or perhaps the balcony above. When we have that understanding, then we can define the scope of work in the drawings, the specs, and what we refer to as the project manual, which is the combination of the bid specifications and the drawings. That's what you want put together by that independent third party, whether it's an architect, an engineer, a roof consultant, someone who is going to understand the association's needs. That then allows us to get those leveled bids, and then we can make sure the contract terms are very clear. The contractor understands the expectations of them for the project. They can ask the technical questions to the engineer before the project starts. The engineer can help you interview the contractor. Your attorney can review the contract terms for the whoever the contractor is. And then we want to have an understanding of the protocol during construction when it comes to submitting requests for information or pay applications or change orders. There should be a clearly defined process for how those get submitted, who is responsible for reviewing those, and then who is responsible for paying or approving those when they've been reviewed. And then finally, project closeout, the understanding of what documentation we're going to get at the end of the project, what the conclusion of the project looks like, what substantial completion or final punch list items, what waivers of lien we may need. We'll dive into those as we progress through this presentation.
And just again, my 2 cents. Boards are comprised of a group of volunteers. Some have engineering backgrounds and some do not. Most do not. You maybe get one every once in a while, but having someone who can help to pinpoint and discern these specific specs, help you understand the project in totality is so invaluable and helpful and helps with burnout. And so just having someone who's there to do this is really helpful.
Yeah, we want to have a well-defined and cohesive team that is communicating. There are 3 people listed here. Not listed will also be people like your attorney and your banker, very critical partners in these capital repair projects. And again, we want you guys relying on your experts for what their core competencies are. Property managers, we're going to rely on you guys to handle access to the property, communication, relaying to us what the board process is, when the board meetings occur, how they go through approval of contracts, handling invoices, and then setting resident expectations. The engineer is going to handle the technical information. Property manager should not be the one that is responding to change order requests or requests for alternates. As Amy said, that's really just not their responsibility or where their understanding the project is. Rely on your engineer for that. And then the contractor can handle the means and methods, site safety, labor materials, and how things are going to get executed and what the schedule looks like. So those are the 3 main people involved in all of these major capital repair projects. And we want to make sure that they're handling what they're actually responsible for. And that should be detailed in the contract. They should each have their scope of work that the board is going to sign off on, saying, yes, the engineer is going to approve the change orders as they come across or modify the drawings as necessary. This is all information that gets put into our proposals as a licensed design firm for these major repairs.
Yeah, my only comment to this is sometimes we do have boards that do not like to relinquish involvement in such big projects. That is something that can be difficult to navigate for property managers too, because you'll have a board member that wants to stay involved, that wants to stay up to date on the correspondence. However, you also don't want to inundate the engineering consultant or the contractors with board communication. And sometimes that's even written into the contract that there's supposed to be a level of dissonance between the two in order for the contractor to proceed with their work uninterrupted. So when that does become an issue, that is a time that you can talk to us as your attorneys on different ways to kind of handle board members that are too involved, owners that won't leave the work site. But that's difficult. It's difficult to kind of sometimes really narrow in and focus on just having 1 or 2 points of contact with the association.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'd like to talk now, just go through a couple of these quickly. I'm going to show you just examples of what a bid that you might expect from a contractor for a major repair versus a bid form that's put together by a licensed design professional. I don't expect you to be able to read any of the language on the screen. I promise I've got some snippets that I cut out in the next couple of slides here to just show the level of detail that's included and the disparity between the two of these. Again, this is not a knock on contractors in the slightest. They are the ones that handle the execution. You would not want me on your roof pounding shingles into your roof structure. Again, it's just about making sure that everyone handles the part of the project that they have their expertise in. So this is just a general bid form for exterior wall repair project. As Amy said, red flags should go up if you have a major repair plan and the bid form is only a couple of pages or 15 line items. There is a lot of ambiguity there. Conversely, this would be just a small snippet of a spec sheet and drawing set that would be put together by a licensed design professional. That's a part of the bid form that every contractor would have to fill out as part of the bidding process of a project. So let's talk about some of the major differences here. And the major one that I want to talk about is ambiguity. If you have a major project coming up, we're talking ticket price greater than 6 figures, and you're seeing terms like tuck point as necessary and repair as needed, alarm bells should be going off because this is just so open-ended. On top of that, if you're getting 5 bids and they're all using this language, guess what? Tuck point is necessary and repair is needed means something different to contractor X, contractor Y, contractor Z. So how do we really understand what it is that we're engaging this professional to do without that explicit language there? The other aspect of this is that these contractor proposals, they're not going to have drawing details. Those things are not going to be part of their bid form or referenced in their bids, which is why you want to have that design professional put these together.
Yeah, absolutely. My thing, when I see language like that, tuck pointing as necessary, repair as needed, one of the biggest things that you can do is put a dollar cap on it and have that plugged into the overall cost. So tuck point is necessary, but not to exceed X amount without board authorization or without the engineer authorization, just so that you can keep some sort of tab on the cost of these ambiguous terms and tasks.
Yeah, absolutely. And conversely, when we have the design professional put together these bid forms, then we can add some specificity to these projects. Specifically, quantities are a big part of this. Instead of tuck point as necessary, we might see tuck point mortar allowance 200 lineal feet, 50 lineal feet, the number of lintels explicitly stated, and the material used for those lintels. And then the big portion of this is that the bid form specifically references the drawings and specifications put together by the design professional, which means that the contractor is going to be obligated to perform the work to those specifications and drawings. And we'll talk about, at the end of this, I have an example of when these things go out of order and the contractor is hired first and the engineer hired later, and how that can cause some issues as a part of construction. But I'll give some examples of just bid forms real quickly so you can see we've got the detail here on what exactly is going into this project. And then every single contractor has to fill out those line items, and you can see real differences in their pricing. Unless, Amy, you have any quick notes on this one?
Not on this one.
So this is just an example bid form. Again, I don't expect you to be able to read all these line items, but this is the level of detail that we want to see in the bid forms. We want to break down each of these elements and understand what materials are used, what connections are called for, and then we can actually compare these bidders apples to apples because we know they're bidding on the same scope of work. If we don't have those drawings and details included in the bid form, this is where we run into issues like this, where we have the building wrap held short of the step flashing. This is the most critical details in almost all of these major repair replacement projects are the transitional components where the roof meets the wall. In this example, If you have wind-driven rain against this wall, it's going to go right into the interior unit, get right into the wall system, and degrade those systems. So this is just why it's really important to make sure that we have an understanding of the project before construction starts, and those details are specified, and the contractor agrees to perform the work to those specifications.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe even run into industry standards at that point and some issues with construction defect.
Yeah, workmanship, absolutely. So just kind of further fleshing this out, critical contract content. This is before work begins. We want to have a full understanding of what the scope of work is, the locations for where the work is going to be completed. If we have a masonry contract that says tuck point as necessary, well, which elevation is that? What unit numbers is that outside of? All of that should be detailed in these documents, including reference to those drawings, details, and specs, the materials and products and performance criteria and installation standards. All of that should be built into the contract. And then alternates, allowances. We want to have a full understanding of what change orders might look like if additional materials are required. And then a definition of the performance and conditions. What hours the contractor expects to be on site, how they're going to protect the property. If you have a property that's very close to yours and you're doing exterior wall work, there will probably need to be protections in place for both your property and the neighboring property, how they're going to access the building, whether it's by scaffolding or lift or swing stage, what the pricing may look like for permits, safety. All these things should be clearly specified in the documents before work begins when we're selecting the contractor.
Absolutely. And this is definitely where I'd like to butt in a little bit. Absolutely have all of this spelled out in these bigger contracts, and even sometimes the smaller contracts too, for just one-off repair work. It is so important to have hours defined, when the workers will be on the premises, not only just because you want to know when they're working, but as a courtesy to the other community members too. People want to know when there's going to be hammering outside, all of that. In addition to that, we recommend having some sort of provision in contracts speaking to cleanup of debris. So you don't have nails causing flat tires around the association in the community, so that there aren't any pressing hazards. Storage of material. I've run into an issue where someone stored material on the roof and it rained and that material caused the roof to collapse. So just these simple things that, seem like common sense. We all have been in this industry long enough to know that common sense is not everyone has it. And sometimes you have to spell it out. So absolutely have that information up front and center, and make sure to communicate to your residents. In addition to that, who is getting permits for what? Make sure that it is spelled out, whether typically, we'll put it on the contractor to get the required permits just because they have a better understanding and wherewithal of that entire process. Given their industry, it's only advantageous for them to do so and have those connections to help pull those things a little faster. Absolutely have some safety guidelines in place, have some requirements for the employees or the independent contractors working on your property. Make sure they have the requisite insurance to make sure that they're covered, and so the association isn't on the hook for who knows what can happen. And in addition to that, have substantial completion defined in a timeline for punch list process items. So let's say there's a few things that didn't get done. You go through with the engineer, point them out, have a timeline, have 30, 60 days out in which those have to be completed prior to the completion of the contract, or have some sort of remedial measure in place if that's not done. It's so important to make sure that a project, once it's started, is finished fully and correctly. You don't want to have to go through this again or find out that someone didn't put the wrapping all the way down the wall. So One of the ways of doing that is to make sure to do a thorough evaluation walkthrough, 7 or so days after substantial completion so that you can pinpoint potential problem areas. And that's, yeah, again, another thing that we like to include in our contracts too, just so that you don't waste your time and money on these bigger ticket items.
All right, let's talk about money as a part of these projects. So again, before we've agreed to use X contractor for the work, we want to make sure that there's an understanding of how people are going to get paid as the project progresses. This is maybe not as critical of a step if this is a project that's going to take 1 week, but if this is a project that's going to take several months or phased over several years, there are going to be certain milestones that are going to be hit, and the association is going to have to release money to that contractor. We want to understand what those terms are. So we want to have that breakout of the total contract sum by line item, so every pay request can be checked against the work that's completed. Again, this is typically the responsibility of your owner's representative on site, typically the engineer or architect who's making their periodic site visits and can see and confirm the work is being completed. When contractor X submits their pay app, you can see this G702, G703 reference. This is a reference to the AIA family of documents. I understand those might not be as widely used in Wisconsin as they are in Illinois. That's okay. Not necessarily important. What is important is that there is a process for how pay applications get submitted and who reviews those, and then eventually approves them and pays them out as a form of this project. So lien waivers may be a portion of these pay applications, especially the final pay apps or release of retainage, which we'll talk about. So we just want to make sure that we're paying them for the work that's completed and we're getting the documentation necessary when that payment is submitted.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we, again, along with the payment, like to include a timeline for completion of these projects. This seems kind of like the opportune time to bring that up as well. But you want to have a start date and an end date. It sounds very rudimentary, but the number of problems that have arisen due to a failure to have a completion date or substantial completion date is tenfold. And that gets kind of tied up in the discussion regarding contract payment, et cetera. But having a completion date will help not only with the installation payments or however you divvy it up, but also just knowing when the project will end.
Yeah, along with the pay applications, change orders are also going to be a part of several of these projects that you do. Hopefully not 100% of them, but they do occur. Just an example of the AIA change order form. These should follow a similar process to the pay applications. If contractor is removing material and identifies unforeseen circumstances, they can alert the engineer to that, and we can put together a plan, a path forward to either modify the drawings as necessary or replace the wood rot as necessary as we move forward, and again, make sure it fits into the holistic plan of repair that we've put together. So this is just a sample change order form and then the pay application form as a part of the AIA family of documents. Again, if you're not using AIA, that's fine, but we want to make sure we have a process for handling these over the course of construction.
Absolutely. And this is also why, too, it's important when you are budgeting for these specific capital projects to overestimate as opposed to hit the nail on the hammer, because you never know what you're going to find once you start digging in and taking siding off and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So typical process when construction actually begins. Again, this should be spelled out in the contract, in the agreement with the owner's rep who's handling the project and the contractor. Typically, there's a pre-construction meeting before work begins. That's going to include your property manager, a board member if they'd like to attend, the contractor, superintendent, whoever that may be, and then the engineer, just so we can confirm that we understand the logistics of the project, the schedule, and how communication is going to be handled. The weekly reports again, detailed in the contract. We want to have transparency over construction so the board and property manager don't have to guess on where we're at with the project. So typically there will be periodic site visits to capture specific milestones of the project. The engineer will be on site and say, this is the size of the team that was there. This is the work that they completed. And this is just an extra layer of transparency and protection when it comes to things like pay applications and understanding if we're behind schedule as early as possible, how we can get back on schedule or why we're off schedule. We need to know those things as soon as possible. And a monthly meeting is really going to be insufficient to handle that, especially on these more complex projects. And then the pay app reviews we discussed. And then the final punch list is what I'd like to spend some time on now. How we close out these projects, again, should be part of the schedule that's outlined when you're selecting your contractor. But we want to know exactly what sort of documentation we're going to get when we complete those projects. Amy, I'm not sure if you have some information on things like waivers of lien, really critical aspect of closing out these projects. If you want to talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you don't want to be in a position where because of let's say the contractor subcontracts out work, let's say the contractor, subcontractor goes after for payment. You don't want to be on the line for any failure to pay in any capacity. And so a lot of times there will be, as a project progresses, for every payment made towards the total, there'll be a lien release accompanying that as well. And it's just to ensure that the association will not be held responsible, or there won't be something on the title that will adversely impact the saleability of any of the units or anything of that nature. And so we understand why contractors would like those, just to guarantee that they get their money's worth for the work that they perform. And so this is where we really try to strike a balance between our competing interests. Yes, we understand that you would want the ability to lien on amounts owed or outstanding for a project. But at the same time, when we make a payment, we want you to relinquish your ability to lien in exchange for this payment as the project progresses.
Yeah, and these other documents listed here. These should all be things that are a part of that final project closeout binder. When we're getting to the end of the project, we're getting our certificates of substantial completion. We want to make sure you guys, as the owners and property managers, have all this information in a night. It might not be a real binder. None of us use paper anymore, but a digital project binder that have things like maintenance instructions, warranties, and understanding of how to make a warranty claim if necessary. It should also include all of the field reports or inspection reports that your licensed design professional put together over the course of the project. So if we have any issues with this project moving forward, we can go to this digital folder or project binder, and we know where to find that information. And really, the final retainage and final payment is the last piece of leverage the association has on these projects. So we want to make sure we have these things in hand before we're submitting that final payment or as a condition of final payment.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing at the end of this, is to make sure that the project is wrapped up to the board and to the engineer's satisfaction. I'd really rely on them to pinpoint particular issues with the work performed and help compile that punch list. But it is kind of your last chance to make sure that this is really tidied up. And so, yeah, it's one of the most important components of a project like this. So we typically recommend having a 7-day window in which you can inspect the property for any of these outstanding issues, discuss it, and make sure that it gets done before you do that final payment to the contractor, and that's specifically spelled out within the contract so it doesn't get perceived as being some sort of withholding of payment. It's agreed upon from the get-go. So really important to make sure is incorporated in any contract that you do.
Yeah, and extra motivation to again have your engineer of record involved over the course of the project. So they're catching those issues during construction rather than after the fact. If you do not have the engineer of record involved during construction, at least have someone that's knowledgeable and acting on behalf of the association make that final inspection after work is completed and not 18 months down the road. If you're doing 18 months down the road, you may be past your workmanship warranty for the contractor. So we want to make sure that we have an understanding of we actually got the work that we paid for as the association.
Yeah. And it's also important too to make sure that you're doing, like, let's say prior to procurement of an installment payment, that you do an inspection as well, just again to catch those issues as they go. So you can look at what you're being invoiced for and maybe have the engineering consultant do an inspection. So again, you're not left at the end of this kind of scrambling and not knowing whether there's outstanding issues that are no longer visible, or if there's just kind of a lot that's gone wrong and you're just catching it at the tail end of a huge multi-million-dollar project.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the major themes so far are measure twice, cut once. We want to make sure that we're doing enough work on the front end, both in our contracts and scope definition. And then we also just want to make sure that we're gathering the information necessary to protect us during construction and after construction. So warranties, really quickly, are not an insurance policy. Warranties are a fickle mistress. They are complex and confusing. Oftentimes, the warranty provided can depend on the contractor you select, specifically for things like roofing materials. I know GAF or Owens Corning may have a relationship with certain contractors, so they may be able to provide a platinum warranty for your roof replacement project that another contractor may not. So these are all things to consider when you're selecting a contractor. But we should also understand that a 20-year warranty on your roof may come with some stipulations on how to handle that warranty and may not be as simple as, oh, we don't have to do any maintenance or anything. If we have any issues or leaks over 20 years, it's going to be paid and covered for. That is almost never the case. So this is not something that we want to rely on as property managers or association boards when we're going through these projects.
Right. Yeah, just adding to the warranty, it's so important to understand what voids your warranty. Like, more than anything else, a lot of times with some of the projects that have come across my desk, one of the biggest things I see is siding. Is when unit owners will put holes in the siding, and it can, in essence, void the warranty if there's intentional damage to the siding. So you just want to make sure that either with your engineer or with me or whoever you want, just go through and make sure you know exactly what voids your warranty, so that you can make, for example, a resolution indicating that no one can nail things into the siding. And if they do so, it'll be a pretty hefty fine, just because of the reverberation of that action and its impact on the warrantability. Or if you are doing a replacement project for windows and there's a potential that there's, again, siding is just a huge one, may impact the siding and the warrantability of the siding, that you have some quality assurance in place or build that into some type of policy for window replacements. So again, you can keep that warranty intact. So super important to understand the ins and outs of what's required to keep your warranty, because it does matter, and they will find it. They will find ways to avoid these things. No one wants to incur these additional costs, and it kind of goes against you. So just make sure that you have an understanding of what you need to do after this project to keep those warranties intact.
Absolutely. So we'll summarize here, and then I want to talk about some quick examples of where things can go awry with contracts, since I know that is really going to be the most tangible thing for you guys on this call. So really, we've spoken about all of the different information that should be included in the contracts from start to finish in these major projects, from the problem identification and investigation to the scope definition, understanding what the exact scope of work is that's going to address the root cause of the association, making sure that's referenced in the contractor's bids, making sure we know how the contractor is going to get paid over the course of the contract, who is going to be responsible for making those site visits and observing the work and making modifications to the drawing set if necessary, if there are unforeseen circumstances. And final project closeout binder, making sure that we have all of that information at the end for liens, contractor affidavits, the record drawings, approved submittals. All of that should be included in that final document. So we know from start to finish, we have everything necessary moving forward. We've reduced the risk at the beginning of the project and reduced the unknowns, and we've protected ourselves to make sure that we're spending our limited resources in an efficient manner for these major repair projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll let you keep going with this and then I'll talk about termination when the time comes.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, termination is one of the major things that we haven't touched on. I'll let Amy talk to you about that. But just some quick examples of issues that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 years alone for major repair projects. This one we've talked about, window leak. That isn't really a window leak. If you're an association, you're going to spend $250,000 to replace your windows. You better make sure those are what's actually failing and causing the leak. So we want to make sure the scope, again, meets the needs of the association. And then we don't have to have the finger pointing at the end of the project for, we still have leaks. Is it the window installer? Is it the mason? Is it the roofer? Execution, absolutely critical one. If you're spending 6 figures or more on major repair projects, you want to have a scope of work and details laid out before work begins. We have an association working with right now that replaced all of their townhome roofs in the last 5 to 9 years, and they're replacing all of them again in 2026 and 2027. That is absolutely heartbreaking to hear, even as the engineer, but man, the owners are spending so much money on a project that just was not done properly because they don't understand the critical details of these roof-to-wall intersections, the ice and water shield, ventilation and insulation. We want to know these things when we're going through these projects, so we're not spending our money again in the next 5 to 10 years to replace these things that should last 20 to 30, 35 years. Permitting is another big one as a part of contracts. If you need to get a permit, you don't really have a choice. You're going to have to get stamped drawings from a licensed design professional, but also just approval from the city. We had an association that was doing a patio repair project and they were pouring concrete for that. The authority needed to perform a pre-pour inspection to approve that project to keep it moving forward. There was not communication there. The authority having jurisdiction, the building official, was not on site, but because the engineer was involved to take pictures during construction, they were able to use our photos and our field reports to then give the stamp of approval for that project rather than having to tear up those patios and re-pour them. And then the other major one that we see is involving the engineer or design professional at the wrong point of the project. If you already have a contract in hand with a roofer or a mason, whoever it may be, and then you involve the engineer, well, their bid is not going to reference the engineering drawings that were created after the fact. And that's an issue that we had very recently, again, with patios, where we specified a traffic coating to be installed, but because it's not listed in the contractor's bid form, that's not going to be a part of the project. So we want to make sure that we have the engineer involved as a part of the planning phase, so we're making the best use of their expertise over these projects. And then finally, termination. Thank goodness this property we were working with had very clear termination terms. They did an asphalt replacement project, and the contractor absolutely disappeared right near the finish line of this project. And because they had very clear termination terms, that contractor is going to be on the hook. They're going to have to they won't get their retainage back, and they're going to have to pay for the punch list closeout items as a part of that contract. So termination is something that doesn't happen on every project, hopefully less than 5% of the ones that we're working on, but we want to make sure we're protected if we run into these circumstances where the contractor just up and vanishes. We want to make sure that we can recoup those costs.
All right. Well, Trey has officially made my blood boil by reading off all of these things. I get a little protective of my associations. I hate when I see, and 90% of contractors and people out there are good. We want to believe in good. We want to believe that people are helping us. And we want to trust everyone that we hire. It just doesn't always pan out that way. You want to think that everyone has the best intentions, and that's obviously how we, should live our life. People have good intentions for the most part, but sometimes they just don't, and that's where we come in. And so, seeing associations get taken advantage of, having to replace their roofs after 5 to 9 years is just absolutely ridiculous. And it makes me so mad. It's such a waste of money. And so we just want to do whatever we can to make sure that our associations are protected, and that we have all these things taken into consideration, and we use our expertise to help you in the long run. And so I think having an engineering consultant and an attorney look over all this stuff and be involved is just so important to help get the most out of your money and your time and your efforts. With that said, lately, I think that sometimes I'll see my associations kind of get jerked around with contractors, for a variety of reasons, but some of the most pressing ones have been a lack of skilled labor or more lucrative jobs that are out there. You'll see some contractors, especially if there is no completion time listed on the contract. Again, such a simple thing, or just like a window, like within the months of October, or even if you say the completion, a completion date, but must be fully finished, satisfactory with the punch list completed by like 3 or 4 months out. That is whatever you can get them to agree to that is in a time frame that's within reason, like even 6 months. Just do it, because it is so important to have an end date on your contracts so that the contractor doesn't get a more lucrative job, send all their skilled workers there, and then use your site to train the new ones. This happens, and it's so frustrating. And there's very little, when you've agreed to a contract without a completion date, there's very little we can do. We will scavenge Wisconsin state statute and case law, absolutely, and do the best we can, but just set yourself up for success from the get-go. So that's one thing that we also include in termination provisions is, there's no excuses if you can't get talent. That's not the association's problem. What is reasonable for time delays is like tornadoes, natural disasters, floods, those types of things. Fine, we get it. We can go ahead and figure out another completion date, do an addendum to the contract. But that's the one that bothers me. When they're not following laws, when they don't have like the correct employment documentation even that's necessary. I'm reading from my wish list here of things. When people aren't getting paid by the general contractor, we don't want to be a part of that. So just make sure that you have in your contracts the ability to terminate by default of the contractor for not just doing what you hired them to do. You should also have the ability to terminate. We love without cause, because just going through the with cause process, usually there's a 30-day notice to cure. Again, I understand contractors not wanting to enter into something where they invest labor, time, and effort and material and just have it go out the window because so-and-so didn't like that someone like threw a cigarette butt, out the window. Just little things. Even though you shouldn't do that, but you want to make sure that, again, it's mutually beneficial and that your termination provisions make sense and they'll be agreed to. I've had it where I've thrown the kitchen sink into a contract to protect the association, and I've had contractors come back and be like, absolutely not. It looks like you're just trying to sue me. Not the case. We make changes and we want it to be a dialogue and a discussion. And maybe through that, we understand maybe this isn't the contract we want to go with. If they're not willing to work with us, and their automatic thought is like, oh, we're looking to sue them. No, let's have it be a discussion and a dialogue. But I just don't like when people take advantage of my association. So just having a provision to get out of these contracts, if there's something not right and there's a continual delay in work, or you just notice that there's no one working, it's good to make sure that the association is adequately protected. Or even if you see that they're just not doing a good job, and you can have support from the engineering consultant to support that, and then terminate because of that as well. So
Yeah, we want all
my
these
soapbox.
clauses. Yeah, we want all these clauses in the contract, not because we anticipate using each and every one of them, but these situations do arise, and we want to make sure that people are protected and not taken advantage of. So
Right. We're not pulling it out of thin air. These are all things that have happened.
So this is just a checklist for you guys. If you want to screenshot this, or I think we're going to share the presentation after the fact, but we appreciate your attention. We have some time for some questions. If anyone has anything that we didn't answer along the way, we're happy to answer those now.
Yeah, or if anyone has any horror stories to share
Yeah.
too.
I have a couple of questions, if I might.
Okay.
For you, Amy.
Right.
When you do look over contracts, are you checking that contractor to see if there's any lawsuits against them? Or do you just
Typically,
check the contract?
we just check the contract, but that's a really good idea. Contractors get sued for a variety of things. So, just
Sure.
being in the legal realm in general, you never know how legitimate a lawsuit is. Anyone can sue anyone for anything. And so there's always the question of legitimacy of the lawsuit and what's going on with it. But I think you've just added something to my checklist.
I think that would be great
Yeah, that's a
if
really
we
good
need to
idea.
if we need to ask for that when we send it to you to review. My other question is, who signs the contract? So I've had situations where, as a property manager, I'm asked to sign a contract, and I've had stuff come back and bite me in the butt because they're like, well, we didn't say we wanted the gutters done. We just wanted the roofs. And now you guys have to pay for these gutters. And so we kind of, at our company, said, we're not signing contracts. Only board members are allowed to sign. Would you agree with that?
So that's going to be, as far as your agent relationship, that's not something I can speak to, but I can tell you that a lot of times in the association bylaws, when they're describing the different officer positions, we have to look to see, because they oftentimes mention the ability to enter into contracts. And so we'll look, and oftentimes I'll find that it says, oh, the president has the authority to sign a contract along with like any other officer or with the secretary. And so 2 signatures are required. Now, sometimes there's my magic language that says any of the duties and responsibilities as set forth above can be delegated to a professional property manager or something of that sort, or an agent. In that case, you have that ability to sign a contract on behalf of the association. Would I? I don't know. I think it's good to get the association's signature on it, but I can't speak to how it impacts the property manager, only how it impacts the association. So sometimes you have that delegation, but it's also good to just kind of look at those documents. So if you are having the board sign, make sure if you need 2 signatures, you're getting 2 signatures.
Becky, one thing I started doing with that is that I get it in writing from the board that it's okay for me to sign on their behalf. And then I just attach that to the contract. So I have it for future.
Usually I wouldn't sign a contract unless it's, recorded in the minutes that they approved it. But I still had a situation come back to me where they said, well, no, we didn't want this.
Oh,
You
yeah.
signed the contract. And I'm like, wait a minute. No. Anyway, we've kind of gotten to the point where we just don't, especially if it's a large, if it's, $1,000 or something, and I've got it in the minutes, I'll sign it. But if it's a larger contract or a capital improvement, I make the board sign because I just don't want that responsibility. So
I agree with that.
All right. Any other questions or horror stories? 5 more minutes.
First of all, great job, Amy, Trey. Fantastic information. We did have another question come in. It might be a tough one. The question was, which contract clauses cause the most disputes and how can associations avoid those disputes?
Da-na-na-na. I can speak to mine. I think termination. You don't get to that point without having some major issues in oftentimes major emotions involved, and frustration. And so that's when things just really, that's usually when we get involved. If we haven't already reviewed the contract, it's when you want to terminate because there's a breach of contract because someone didn't uphold their side of the bargain. And then yeah, that's what I typically see. Trey, I know you help with more contracts than I think I could stomach.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a better answer to this than an attorney. I definitely think the termination and indemnification clauses in riders are the ones that I see the most that we, as an engineering firm, will sometimes redline or make modifications to. So I think indemnification is probably the other biggest one that
Absolutely.
that we deal with the most, but I'm not really qualified to speak on indemnification, so I'm going to zip it as it relates to that.
You did enough. You did enough. No, that is another one too as well. And what is an exception to that indemnification to? What constitutes willful misconduct? Those are oftentimes exceptions to our indemnification provisions within a contract. Is if someone acts with willful misconduct, fraud, negligence, having to prove those standards and get into the nitty-gritty of that, it's just difficult. And so again, you want to have things as ironclad as possible, but issues will arise out of the indemnification clause as well. So that was a good one. And then people just fight over warranties too. You see a lot of issues with warranties. I don't necessarily know if they make it into the court as much, but they usually, it's depending on the severity of the issues, workmanship, etc. It'll depend on the dollar amount on whether or not it'll be pursued in court action or just kind of handled between the parties. So a lot can go wrong. And sometimes a lot can go wrong with these. So any provision is up for grabs. So it's hard to pick a favorite.
Well done. Well done. Well said. Very good. It doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Trey and Amy's information is on the screen. They are great resources. Feel free to reach out to them anytime. Very insightful people. Want to thank everybody for joining us. And Amy, Trey, thank you guys very much for your time. It was outstanding.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Todd,
guys.
for facilitating.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
Appreciate it.
We'll get
Thanks,
everyone
everyone.
recording here shortly. We'll see you guys soon.